Hello and welcome to our second episode of Season 2 of Biology Explained with me, Mr. Hill. In today's episode, we are going to be revising quite a big topic in Unit 2 of the National 5 Biology course here in Scotland, all about coordination and control. That is, how the body picks up stimuli in the body and outside the body, and how does it respond to that. Okay, so we're talking about nervous system, we're talking about the hormonal system, and we're comparing the two. Okay, big topic, lots of keywords in here. If you find this very interesting, very useful for your revision, please do like and subscribe and share it amongst your friends. And of course, if you're not from Scotland and you're doing a different course, maybe a GCSE or any other kind of biology or science at sort of age 14 to 16, this will still be very useful for you for your revision. So please do tune in and make use best you can with the season that we are talking about. So without further ado, we're going to make a start. So let's get ready. We're going to be looking at the nervous system and the hormonal system. So let's make a start then on key area 2 of Unit 2, which is all about coordination and control. This is one of the sort of chunkier key areas of the National 5 Biology course. So we're going to be taking our time, making sure that we're talking about some of the key terms that we need to use when describing how a nervous response is transmitted around the body, as well as looking at how hormones are used to communicate within our body, and then comparing the two. Okay, so quite a lot here, so it's important that you do take your time. And we're going to begin by looking at kind of the overview, really, of the structure of the nervous system. So you can see on the screen, I've got an outline of a body. I've got a blue and a green and a pink, post-it note. We're going to first look at the two different parts of the nervous system that you need to be able to describe. Once we've done that, we're going to focus a little bit more on the brain and its structure, and then how the nerves work together to transmit an impulse around the body with a particular focus on the reflex. Okay, so we're going to start by adding to our little body here. So with the blue pen, what I'm going to be doing, let's get this up, here we go. So with the blue pen, what we're going to do is I'm going to draw myself a little brain, okay, here, and a long chain of nervous tissue going down the vertebrae of the body here, okay. That, of course, is the spinal cord. And together, this makes up our central nervous system, or CNS for short, the central nervous system. And this is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. And together, they are involved in the coordination of our responses. So all the information that the different parts of the body are picking up, okay, all those receptors around our body are sending their information to the spinal cord and the brain. And then the brain and the spinal cord are going to be sending signals back to different parts of our body called effectors that are going to carry out a response to the stimuli the receptors have picked up. So the central nervous system's job is to coordinate. So let's just put into our little post-it note here what this is. So this is the central nervous system. And it's made up of the brain and the spinal cord. And it is the coordination center, okay? It's where the decisions are being made, okay? Now, a lot of this is involuntary, okay? That means that we don't think about it. So our brain and our spinal cord are sort of taking all those signals and then making responses to our body just to keep us alive, so we don't have to worry about thinking about it ourselves. Then, of course, there is the big section in the brain where the conscious thoughts and voluntary actions occur, but more on that in a moment. So if that's the CNS, the rest of it is known as the peripheral nervous system. So I'm going to change the color of the pen here to pink. Here we go. And the PNS, the peripheral nervous system, is made up of all the nerves and the nerve tissue that connects the body to the central nervous system. So periphery just means on the edge of something. So in geography, if you're on the periphery of a city, you're on the edge of a city, okay? And so peripheral nervous system is just on the outer edges of our nervous system. So you can see here I'm drawing all these nerves attached to our spinal cord or to our brain that are then going to all of our receptors and all of our effectors around the body, okay? And those are made up of nervous tissue, of nerves, okay? Long cells that take messages from the outside of the body to the central nervous system and back again, from the central nervous system to the outside of the body. Okay, so we say that for short, that would be PNS, peripheral nervous system. And if we just make a wee note here so we can see what the differences are. So this is the peripheral. Okay. There we are. Nervous system. Excuse my spelling there. And that is made up of nervous tissue. Okay. And these are either going to be sensory neurons or motor neurons. More on that very soon. And they connect receptors to the CNS and the CNS to effectors. Again, more on those words a little bit more, okay? So you've got your coordination center in your central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, and then you've got your peripheral nervous system, which are all those other nervous tissue that connects the body to it. Okay, so now that we've introduced the core concept of the nervous system, the two sort of broad sections of that, we're going to focus now a little bit more on the structure of the brain. Now, the brain is an absolute fantastic organ that we still have loads to discover as to what it does and how it works and what happens when things go wrong. It really is a sort of really key area of research in biology that we're still exploring and understanding new things. And at National 5 level, you really just need to have an introduction, really, as to the kind of main kind of sections of the brain and a summary of what they do. If you go on to do human biology at higher, you'll look into a little bit more detail about how different functions are localized, so where different sort of emotions and abilities are found within the brain. But for National 5, we're just going to cover just the broad sort of brush approach, really, to the brain structure. So again, you can see I've got a structure of the brain on the screen. I've got 3 colored post-it notes. What we're going to do is we're going to color in the different parts of the brain, we're going to label what it does, and we're going to say its name, of course, as well. So we're going to start with the big part of the brain, the kind of fluffy part of the brain that we all think about when we think about brains, okay? And this is this bit here, okay? So if I color this in pink, okay? This is known as the cerebrum, or the cortex, okay? But we're going to call it the cerebrum. So let me just put this down here. This is the cerebrum. And it is made up of different lobes, okay? And the lobe is a term used to describe kind of a kind of region of the cortex here, of the cerebrum. Different lobes do different jobs. You don't need to know the names of the lobes at National 5, but we do need to know a little bit about kind of the general idea of what they do. Okay, so the cerebrum then is the site of all conscious thoughts. Okay, voluntary control. Okay, and processing of audio-visual information. Okay, so here in the cerebrum you will find things such as memory, okay, language, emotions, judgment, problem solving, as well as things like vision and hearing. Okay, so not all of it is voluntary, some of it is involuntary, of course, but this is where all that kind of things that make you use found. Okay, so all those nerves that are in the brain here, they're all making those millions and millions of connections like a giant supercomputer, and how those connections are made are translated then into things such as our memories and our ability to communicate. Okay, I didn't put that down the list, that's a very important one to put, communication. Okay. The cerebrum then is really, really important for those kind of human personal kind of effects and personalities and abilities. Okay, and if you think about it, humans are intelligent organisms, and we have quite large brains for the size of animal that we are, and our frontal lobe here is a lot bigger than perhaps you'd expect it to be, and then that is a reason, if you like, for how we are able to be very good at solving problems and communicating and problem solving. Okay. Now we know that these things happen at these different parts of the brain in many ways because we can study how the electrical signals are fired when patients are asked to do certain things. Also, if something goes wrong, if a bit of the brain gets damaged and then we lose a function, it suggests that that part of the brain might have had that function in the first place. So if you damage part of the brain and suddenly you stop you can't talk, or your language you don't understand, then that suggests that might be involved in language. Okay, so the cerebrum then is the kind of big foldy part of the brain, and that's where all those conscious processes occur. There are involuntary processes there, of course, too, but those are the things that make you you. Okay, right, the next part is the little purple bit here, my favourite part of the brain. It looks very cute on a dissection, like a little tree when you cut it in half, and it's just this bit here. Here, this is known as the cerebellum. Okay, now it's not the cerebrum, it's the cerebellum. Okay, cerebellum. And the cerebellum is responsible for a couple of things. It's responsible for fine motor skills. Okay, so sort of the fine control of muscles, as well as things like balance. Okay, this is an involuntary part of the brain. We don't use this part of the brain consciously. Okay, this is not where thoughts or memories or anything else happens here. This is more about putting the person in its environment. Okay, so all these signals that come in to let us know where we are, and the balance then is that we need to use to keep ourselves in place, and the motor skills required to kind of keep us there, kind of keep us stable, if you like. Okay, so the cerebellum then is involuntary, and it is responsible for those fine motor skills and also balance. So let's put that down. So it's involuntary, okay, processes, including balance and fine motor skills. Okay, fantastic. Right, the last part of the brain then is known as the medulla, or the medulla oblongata, to give it its full name. And I'm going to colour this in blue here. So let's take our blue pen. Okay, and it's just this bit here. Okay, top of the brain stem. This is where the spinal cord connects to the brain. And this is a really critical part of the brain that controls all those things we don't think about, but that keeps our body alive. So heart rate, breathing rate, all those sort of things are controlled at the brain stem here. There's no conscious thought involved, it's involuntary, and it basically keeps our systems working, and things like heart rate, breathing rate. Obviously, this is a very important part of the brain, so if this was damaged, then it's usually lethal, because if you can't control your heart rate, you can't control your breathing rate, then you don't survive. Okay, the brainstem is found rather delicately, actually, just at the back of your sort of nape of your neck here. Okay, well, just not the nape, but just underneath the cranium there. So it is a quite delicate part of the brain. Okay, body. So obviously, it's very important that you wear your helmet, for example, if you're on a bike, because you don't want to get that part of the body damaged at all. So let's make a note of what this is then. This is the medulla oblongata. Medulla is fine at National 5. Medulla is fine. Okay, it is involuntary processes that keep you alive, e.g. heart rate and breathing rate. Okay, so there we go. In a nutshell then, 3 areas of the brain. The cerebrum, which is the main part of the brain here, that has all of our conscious thoughts, all of our thinking skills, all of our personalities, our communication, as well as processing some of our audio-visual information. You've got the cerebellum, involved in placing you in the external environment, so things like balance, keeping you standing upright, essentially. And then you've got the medulla oblongata, top of the brainstem, which controls your heart rate and breathing rate. So we're going to have a look at the reflex as an example of how the body responds to changes in the external environment. And a response a reflex, is a particular type of response that is there to keep you alive. Okay, reflexes have a number of features that are consistent between them all, and I'm sure you've heard of them. Okay, or you've experienced them before, like when you tap the knee, your leg kind of gets kicked. Okay, these are all examples of a reflex. So all reflexes then share these features. I'm going to type in this box here so we can see. The first is that they are fast. Okay, often doesn't involve the brain. Okay, only the spinal cord as our coordination center. Okay, some of them do use the brain, of course, but most of them actually go to the nearest part of this central nervous system, which is the spinal cord. The next is that they are fixed. Okay, it's the same response each time. Okay, so if you touch something hot, you're going to have the same response. Doesn't matter what it is. Okay, it needs to be the same and it needs to be fast in order for your body to survive the danger. Next, it is involuntary. Okay, I'm going to do the V capital there, just to remind you it's a F. Okay, so it's involuntary. There's no thinking required. Okay, again, that allows it to be fast. You don't have to think. It just happens automatically. And last but not least, it is vital. Okay, you need it for survival. Okay, if you didn't have a reflex and you tripped over, you'd just be smacking your body against the ground instead of kind of reaching out to break your fall. That could be cause more injury. If you were to rest your elbow onto a hot heat plate, for example, and you didn't move, you're going to burn your skin. Okay. Babies, when they're placed down, okay, if they don't kind of reach out or kind of jolt slightly, then their neck might be damaged because their head's really quite heavy. Okay, so all of these things are reflexes that are needed for you to survive, so they're vital. Okay, so fast, fixed, involuntary, and they are vital. And they use our peripheral nervous system to get the message from your receptors to your central nervous system and then back out to the parts of the body that are going to carry out a response. Okay, and you need to be able to describe those stages and use the correct keywords. Now remember, in biology, it's all about language and sequencing. You are telling stories as to how life works. Okay, so you've got to make sure that you're using the right language and not missing out the important steps along the way. Too many students say the start and the end of a sequence, okay, the cause and the effect, but they don't go into detail, and that's where you're losing marks. So make sure that you are making detailed points about the steps along the way. Okay, so we're going to start with an example reflex here. Imagine you have touched yourself, something that's really hot. Okay, so touch a candle, for example. We're going to start with that. So the change in the environment that has been picked up is known as the stimulus. And I'm going to type it so you can see this here. So stimulus. Okay, so the stimulus is the change in the environment that you're picking up. In this case, it's heat from the candle. Now, in your skin, on your hands, you're going to have a number of receptor cells that pick up temperature and pick up pain. Okay, and these are going to get fired and triggered when they experience the stimulus. Okay, you have receptors in all your sense organs. So your eye, the retina, for example, has light sense receptors. You've got chemical receptors in your nose and your tongue to pick up smells and taste. You've got vibration receptors in the inner ear that pick up sound waves. Okay, these are all known as receptor cells. Okay, so we're going to put the word receptor here. So the stimulus is picked up by the receptor. The receptor is then going to have to send the message to your coordination center, which is your brain and spinal cord, in order for the response to then be controlled, okay, and coordinated. Name of the topic. So it's going to send this down a particular type of neuron, and you need to remember the name of this, okay? So this neuron is known as a sensory neuron. So I'm going to attach it here. Neurons are incredibly long cells. This is the axon here. The cell body here has the nucleus, and then it's going to reach out here at our coordination center. We call that the sensory neuron. Remember, sensory because it's connected to the sense organ that's picking up the stimulus. In the coordination center, and let's label that, okay, which is the spinal cord in this example, the message is going to be passed to a nerve cell off the coordination center, and we call that an interneuron. Sometimes it's called a relay neuron because it's relaying the information to the next neuron, okay? But at National 5 we call them interneurons, so we use the word interneuron in this case. They're short, they're found only in the coordination center. Your brain, from the last section, is made up of interneurons, these tiny neurons that are making multiple connections in order to form memories and communication. Okay, so interneuron. Okay, now the interneuron, okay, is going to send the message to the part of the body that's going to carry out the response to the stimulus. Okay, so I'm going to use a different color for this one. Okay, so it connects here. Okay, here we have our cell body, and it's going to move all the way to the part of the body that's going to carry out the response. We call this neuron the motor neuron. The motor neuron is driving the response. and it connects to the coordination center to the cells that are going to carry out the response. Now, the part of the body that's carrying out the response has another term. We call this the effector, because it's carrying out the effect. Okay, and the effector is typically going to be a muscle, okay, or a gland that might release a hormone. Okay, more on hormones in a minute. So, for example, in this one, the motor neuron is connected to the effector cells, the muscles in our arm. That's going to move our hand away from the hot candle. Okay, so the effector carries out the response. Okay, and the last word there is, of course, response. The response is what happens. Okay, in this case, you can see here the hand's moving away from the candle. Okay, so in summary then, okay, reflex arc goes as follows. You have this stimulus, which is the change in the environment. It's picked up by a receptor cell that sends a message down a sensory neuron to the coordination center. The message is passed to a motor neuron via an interneuron, and that motor neuron takes the message to your effector cells that carries out the response. Okay, so many papers have questions that ask you to put these in the right order, particularly about the neurons, or extended answer responses where you've got to describe a response. Then they're looking for marks for the correct use of the words stimulator, receptor, effector, response, and putting the neurons in the right order. Okay, so it's very important that you get that. Perhaps in your revision, you can think of another example and you can write out the different steps involved. One last point before we move on to the hormones, and that's to look at what happens at the connection between the neurons. Now, this is a very interesting part of neurobiology, which you go into a lot more detail in higher human biology if you're interested. We only need to really know the name of it and what it is at this stage though. So you see that I have deliberately drawn these neurons not in contact with each other. And that's what happens in real life, okay? The neurons are not attached. Instead, there is a little gap between them, okay? So this is our interneuron here, and let me draw our motor neuron here. Okay? There is a little gap. That gap is known as a synapse, okay? That is known as a synapse. Let me type it for you. Okay. Synapse. And the synapse is the gap between neurons. What happens is that a chemical is released from the neuron when it's triggered, and that chemical passes over the synapse, and if enough chemical is picked up by the second neuron, then it gets triggered and sends the message. This is important because it allows the body to control a response. If they were just connected, once you turn it on in one place, it will just turn on the other place, okay? Like a complete circuit in electricity. You need a synapse so you can halt it if you need to, or ensure a certain threshold of trigger is needed before you fire the next neuron. Okay, a really important part of biology. This is where a lot of drugs work, okay, where they either suppress the response or they enhance the response, and then that changes the way the body functions. So synapses are an incredibly important part of biology. At National 5, you just need to know that they exist and that the gaps between the neurons are called synapses. Okay, very big part of the topic there, so feel free to pause, go back and have a revise of that. But our next section, we're going to move on to looking at the hormonal system, sometimes known as the endocrine system. Okay, so the second part then of coordination and control is all about the hormonal system or the endocrine system. Now, the nervous system that we've just talked about relies on specialized cells, nerve cells, to send electrical signals around the body to control the body. It's really fast, it turns on and it turns off immediately. Okay, so it doesn't linger. Okay, a nervous response gets started and then stops, and it's fast. Okay, sometimes, however, we need a way to communicate around our body that lingers for a longer time. Okay, that you just need to kind of turn on and then let it process. Okay, that's where hormonal control comes into play. Okay, now a hormone is a chemical messenger that's produced in parts of the body called glands. They travel around the blood, and then when they're picked up in the target organs, that hormone will change that behavior of the cells in that organ. Okay, so think, for example, if you are suddenly being chased by something, or you're on a roller coaster, something that's very scary that's about to happen, your receptors will pick up this, and it will then trigger your adrenal glands, which sit just above the kidneys, just here, to produce adrenaline. And that hormone adrenaline is then released into the blood, and then that then moves around the body and causes things like your heart rate, your breathing rate to go up, your pupils to dilate, in order for you to really kind of be alert and ready to run. Okay? You want that to happen for a sustained length of time. You don't want to just turn it on and off. You can't just keep firing it because it will exhaust your nervous system. So you want to release a chemical, and then your body is affected by that over a longer period of time. Eventually, all the hormone is used up, and so the effects cools down after a certain period of time. Okay, so hormones then, very, very important. It's technically known as the endocrine system, and whilst at National 5 you don't need to know the names of the different glands or the hormones they produce, it's good to have a few examples just in your back pocket in case a question asks you to relate to it. Okay, so let's just make a couple of points then, just so that we are aware of the summary of what is a hormone. So a hormone is a chemical messenger. Okay, it is produced in glands. Apologies for cinnamon there. Produced in glands. Okay, and it travels in the blood. Okay, the effect is slower to start than nerve transmission, but lasts longer. Okay. So here, for example, you've got on the body, I've labeled up a few images, of some of the typical glands that we talk about. So let's just identify just a couple so that you are aware of what they do. Okay, the ones that are most important, certainly for National 5. So this one here then, okay, this kind of corn on the cob shape thing. This one, I'll just do black there. This is the pancreas. Okay, we learn a lot about the pancreas in the digestive system. Okay, it produces hormones that control blood sugar, blood glucose levels. Okay, so insulin and glucagon, more on that in a minute. Okay, you do need to know about this one. Other examples, of course, include, let me change the color of my pen, include the, let's talk about the adrenal glands. So just mentioned those before. So on the kidney, just sitting on top of the kidney, we've got the adrenal glands. Okay, it produces adrenaline. Okay, and that's responsible for making sure your body's alert when there's danger present. Okay, and you've got other, let's do one more that comes up a lot. Well, let's do two more. The next one we'll do the pituitary gland. Okay, so the pituitary gland is just here in our brain. It's kind of the master gland. Okay, so this kind of produces hormones that then tell other glands to produce hormones. Okay, so this is really responsible for pretty much everything. Okay, so the pituitary gland. Okay, it's the master gland. Okay, controls water levels in the body. It controls growth of the body. Okay, tells other glands to produce hormones that then tell you to metabolize more or to start producing your cells. So really important gland there. And then the last ones, of course, are our fertility glands. Okay, so you've got your ovaries and your testes. More on those a little bit later. Okay, in the next key area. Okay, so ovaries and testes here. And they are responsible for releasing hormones that control fertility and sexual characteristics. Okay, so we have here so ovaries or testes. Okay, and they control fertility, puberty, and sexual development. Okay, very important processes for the body. Okay, there we go. So just some examples then of glands in the body and the hormones that they produce. The most important thing for you to remember, though, is that the hormones are a chemical messenger that travel in the blood. They're produced by glands, and they are slower to start but linger longer than a nervous response. Okay, remember, a nervous response is an electrical response. It gets turned on and off. It doesn't travel through blood. It travels down nerves. They're fast, but they get switched off as soon as the message gets stopped. Okay. Now, with the hormonal control, you do need to learn about one particular example of control using hormones. It's a type of process known as homeostasis, which we're going to talk about in the next section, and it's going to be about the pancreas and the hormones that they produce to control blood glucose. Okay, so let's have a look at that now. Okay, so last section of this video. This is a long key area. There's a lot to cover in this one, so it is important that you take your time on this. You're bound to get a good amount of questions on this. Okay, so let's have a look now at how hormones are used to control blood glucose. Now, any kind of control of our internal environment to keep it steady, to keep it stable, so we don't have too much glucose or not enough glucose, that we're not too hot, not too cold, not too much water, but enough water to survive. All those kind of internal balances we call homeostasis. Okay, you look at a lot more of this again at higher human biology, but you need to appreciate that coordination and control isn't just about responding to the outside world. It's about responding to your body to keep it stable so it doesn't sort of drift towards dangerous extremes. Okay, our body needs to be kept in this kind of middle ground where everything's working healthily. Homeostasis. And one of those examples of homeostasis is controlling blood glucose levels. Okay, glucose is really important. We need it for respiration, and we get a lot of it from the carbohydrates that we eat, of course, in the digestive system. Too much glucose can then cause problems in water balance in our body, which then messes up with the tissues, causes damage. And of course, if you overactivate your hormonal system for a long period of time, it starts to wear out, starts to not work properly, and that's where diseases like diabetes comes into play. Okay, if you don't have enough glucose, then of course you can't respire as much, so then your cells start to deactivate. Okay, they can't be as active, you get tired, lethargy. So it's important that you have enough in there in your blood so that your cells can actually function. Okay, so if you look at the screen then, I've got a schemata here. We're going to be looking at what happens when blood glucose changes. Okay, so we're going to start by what happens when blood sugar levels go up. Okay, so let me just colour this in. Let's do red. So imagine you've got your normal blood glucose level here, and you've had a meal. You're going to start digesting. Your blood glucose levels are going to increase. Okay, so this is due to food. Okay, your body's going to detect that there's more glucose in your bloodstream. Okay, and so what it's going to do is kind of try and bring the level back down by storing some of it. So it's going to get picked up by the pancreas. Okay, so let me just make a copy of my wee pancreas here. Okay, here we go. And let's pop it into our scheme here. The pancreas is going to produce a chemical known as insulin, a hormone known as insulin. So the pancreas produces insulin. Okay, and that's going to happen in response to a high level of glucose in the blood. The pancreas is then going to release the insulin, and that insulin is going to tell cells to start to take in glucose and to convert it to a chemical known as glycogen. Okay, now muscle cells do this, but one of the main organs that stores the glucose is the liver. So I'm going to take our little icon of the liver here, make a wee copy. Let's pop it here. Okay, and so what insulin is going to do is going to tell cells, particularly in the liver, to take in the glucose and convert it to glycogen. Okay, so liver cells take in glucose and convert to glycogen. Okay, now this topic does sometimes cause problems because so many words begin with G, but we'll cover that in a minute. Okay, so the liver cells take in the glucose and convert it to glycogen, which is another carbohydrate that can be stored. Okay, so it's stored in the liver. This is going to bring down the glucose levels in our blood back to normal levels. Okay, and that's all because of the hormone insulin that is released. Now, like I said before, if you have diabetes, if you're type 1, your body is not producing it or not enough of it from birth. So this whole process doesn't work very well. Okay, so if the glucose levels go too high, you can't really control it very well, so you need to inject insulin. Type 2 diabetes occurs because you have, over the years, there are many causes for it, but one cause is that you've overworked your insulin production over the years. Okay, so if you have a very poor diet and you're not exercising enough, you run the risk of your body becoming less responsive to insulin. And so although you're producing it, your liver's not taking it in, it's not really reactivated by it too well. So you then don't take in the glucose, so then it stays high in the blood. And that's where you might then need to change your diet or change your lifestyle in order to kind of reduce that problem. Okay. So type 1, type 2 diabetes just there. Now, if the reverse happens, say for example, you've been doing a lot of exercise, or during the day, you've been exerting, it's been a while since you've had some food. Okay, so let's put exercise here. Doesn't have to be just exercise, it's just day-to-day life. Okay, that's why you have to be having food every couple of hours, right? The blood sugar levels start to go down. This is going to be picked up again by the pancreas. So let's take our pancreas and put it here. Okay. And the pancreas is going to produce a second hormone. It's not going to produce insulin. It's going to produce, it's going to produce glucagon. Okay, so let me just zoom out there for a second. Let us do another text box. So the pancreas produces glucagon. Okay, not insulin. Glucagon is then going to be active on the liver or any other cell that is storing glucose as glycogen, but mainly the liver. Okay, so let's pop our liver here. Okay, and it's going to tell the liver to convert the glycogen back to glucose and release it. Okay, new text box. Here we go. So it's going to tell the liver converts glycogen back to glucose, okay, and releases it into the bloodstream. Okay, so let's get our green pen back out. Okay, so the pancreas produces glucagon. This tells the liver to convert glycogen back to glucose, and the blood sugar levels get back up to normal. Okay, remember it's glucagon. Okay, tells the glycogen to go. Okay, insulin puts the glucose in the liver. Okay, glucagon makes glycogen go away. Okay, now this is a topic where there's lots of words that sound very similar. So again, you've got to just practice writing it out in a sequence, in a story. Do it as a flow chart, do it as a diagram like this diagram. It's a classic diagram to help you remember the processes, okay? Because we have this kind of negative feedback where when things go up, it comes back down to normal. When things go down, things come back up to normal, okay? So this is a nice diagram to perhaps sketch yourself from memory. Practice using those words. Making flashcards where you are writing glucagon, glycogen, glucose, insulin, okay? So that you are practicing those words, okay? Because you will lose mark if you use the wrong G word. Okay, so there we go. An example of hormonal control of the internal environment. This is an example of homeostasis or a negative feedback loop that is very critical to ensure blood glucose levels remain stable in our blood. Okay guys, so we have a selection of multiple choice questions here over the coordination control to practice. Remember, in your National 5, your paper 1, there's 25 marks available for multiple choice. It's very important that you get as many as you can here in order to kind of bank before you go into paper 2. And the questions here, they typically are, you've got to read a table or read all the statements just to make sure that you're not being tripped up in some way. Okay, so there are 3, 4 questions here. So take about 4 minutes, 5 minutes to do these, and then we'll see you very soon where we'll go through the answers. Best of luck. Okay, how did you do? Let's have a look now at our questions. So, question number 9 here. The diagram shows some of the structures of a reflex arc. You've got your receptor here, neuron P, joining with neuron R, joining with neuron Q to the muscle effector here. Which row in the table identifies P, Q, and R? So, R is going to be the interneuron, okay, because it's in between the two, and there's only one that has that correct. So really, you can go straight to the right answer here. It's B, okay. Remember, P is the sensory neuron. It goes from the sense cells, the receptors here, to your central nervous system, and then the motor neuron takes it to your muscles here. Motor neuron. Next, the diagram represents a section through the brain. You've got G and H. Which of the following links a letter to its correct structure and function? Okay, so G is the cerebrum and is the site of reasoning and memory. G is the cerebellum, is the site of reasoning and memory. H is the medulla and controls muscle coordination. H is the cerebellum and controls breathing and heart rate. Okay, so H isn't the medulla because the medulla is here, so we can score this one out. Okay, H is the cerebellum, but the breathing rate and heart rate is controlled by the medulla, so we can score that one out. G is not the cerebellum because H is the cerebellum, so the answer must be A. The cerebrum, the site of reasoning and memory. Okay, questions 11 and 12 refer to the same diagram here. You've got organ X releasing hormone Y, acts on organ Z, and promotes conversion of glycogen to glucose. Which row in the table identifies organ X and hormone Y? Okay, so organ X is producing the hormone. It's always the pancreas, so we can score those two out straight away. We know it's converting glycogen to glucose. So this happens when the glucose levels are low in the blood. Okay, remember, it's glucagon that tells glycogen to go away. So the hormone Y must be the glucagon, so the answer there is D. Finally, specialized cells allow organ Z to respond to hormone Y. This is because the surface of the cell in the organ Z have complementary what? Now, sense synapses, neurons, effectors, receptors. With these questions, if you're unsure, you can definitely rule out the wrong ones to reduce your options, okay? If you remember, a synapse was a gap between neurons, so we can score that out straight away. And neurons are types of cells, so we can score that one out away. We learned in the reflex that the effector is the muscle or the glands that produces the response to a stimulus, so that has to be wrong. So the answer is receptor. So even if you weren't entirely certain, you can rule out the others, and that's an important exam skill to practice. Remember, the cells here, they always have receptors on the surface of them that are complementary to the hormone, and that is going to trigger the cell to do its job. So there you have it, coordination and control, how the body responds to external changes in the environment, to stimuli, as well as changes in the internal environment in order for it to survive. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you find it useful for your revision. Please don't forget to subscribe and indeed share with your friends. But for now, we'll say goodbye, and I'll see you for our next episode where we're going to be looking at fertilization and reproduction. Okay, take care now. Bye-bye.